What's up, my miners of intelligence and consciousness? I'm Rick Brooks, and this is Rick's Mind. Today with me I have guest Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She's a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University and author of the book Strongmen. What's going on, Ruth? Thanks for joining the show today.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
So one of the things that I think a good place to start, right, is to kind of get your story of how you became a professor and your interest in studying fascism. So give our listeners a little bit of the background, and then from there we'll kind of move into where you think we are within a historical context.
Yeah, thanks. So I grew up in California, in Southern California, at a beach town, so pretty far from any kind of dictatorship. And when I was in high school, I started hearing about these refugees from Nazism, like pretty famous ones, like the composer Arnold Schoenberg or the writer Thomas Mann, these like big intellectuals. And they all seem to have settled in or around my town, which is near Malibu, near the beach. And so I got really interested in what was it that forced these people to leave their successful lives and have to transfer like around, halfway around the world. So in college at UCLA, I started, studying dictatorships, and I wrote a thesis on this one conductor, Otto Klemperer, who had to leave Berlin. He was very famous, and he came, to Southern California. And so just the human drama of what it means to have your country become this racist hellhole and have to leave, that interested me. And then I ended up specializing in Italy because one of my professors said, there's so much less done on Italy and it lasted twice as long. So, there's more space to do like original things. So that's how it got started. And little did I know it was going to be also relevant now. So I published, books. So I was basically doing scholarly stuff. And then Trump came on the scene, and I saw his rally and him doing his loyalty oath and kind of talking about racism. And I thought, this is very familiar. And that's how I started doing public stuff.
Okay. Then that is something that I've found with regard to the Donald Trump and his supporters. That is, I've never seen anything like that in my life. The amount of like loyalty and I'm looking for a good word, like fever, fervor, whatever, that surrounded him. I've never seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. He's a very polarizing figure. And so that's kind of what, in your opinion, that's when the alarms went up and you're like, okay, I got to start speaking out, correct?
Yes, it was seeing this demagogue, because obviously this was a country that had slavery, had institutionalized racism. So all of those things I knew from my studies, the existing kind of racisms and hatreds can get kind of energized when these demagogues come on the scene. So here comes Trump, who immediately I saw was different than any other political figure. And everything he did was extremely familiar to me, in the rallies, the loyalty oaths, the appealing to every kind of extremist. So already in the fall of 2015, I wrote this op-ed for CNN, and I wanted to call it Trump's race war, because it was like, again, this is 2015. It was very obvious what he was trying to do, which was he kind of scanned the political marketplace to see what was missing. And he saw that it was ripe for somebody to take all these kinds of extremists, all these malcontents, all these racists, and make them feel elevated, and he said, I love you. You're forgotten no longer. And this is what all of these fascists and demagogues do. So I thought, I have a skill set, I'm recognizing this stuff. And sometimes I would write op-eds, and I was so early that nobody would accept them. Like I wrote a piece January 2016 saying that Trump was going to have a personality cult, and if he got the nomination, we were in big trouble. And nobody wanted this piece because they were like, what are you talking about? It's January 2016. He's hardly started his campaign. I just saw it really clearly. So I opened a blog at HuffPost, which you could do at the time. And that's how I got it published. Like I published it myself, basically, because nobody wanted this thing. They couldn't see what I could see.
That's I think, I mean, part of that problem, right, and not being able to see is because I feel like the amount of let's say shade, right, for lack of a better word, that the media was throwing on him actually did him a lot of favors. No one took his campaign seriously, and just the being a political outsider, an underdog, right, like that all kind of fed into his campaign, and it worked. So it's very interesting, and that you were able to kind of pick this up, and I'm assuming kind of from a modern standpoint, sort of a political outsider, right? So that, like, kudos to you for seeing that.
Yeah, a lot of, and as it turned out, then I, did this book Strongmen that came out in 2020. So I did, research on all of these demagogues and stuff, and a lot of them come from outside of politics. And they had, like, Mussolini was a journalist. Hitler wanted to go to art school. Mobutu in the Congo was a journalist. And so they're able to communicate really well, but they're able to use propaganda. And so they position themselves as a kind of outsider figure and a new figure. And they excite people because they speak differently than classic politicians. And they use media differently than classic politicians. And it's very interesting, when Trump started lying, there are these studies that show that because he positioned himself as like a rogue figure, like a rule breaker, some people kind of liked the fact that he was stretching the truth, because that was part of his, like, saying F you to the establishment. So, and it's the same with when he was right before the election, when the Access Hollywood tapes came out, and he was like, talking about women and, being sexual assaulter. And people said, oh, that's going to end his career. And I was like, it might actually help it, because he's already been established as the rule breaker, the transgressor. So this outsider rogue business that you brought up is actually really important. It
is. And that kind of leads me into the, the next portion of what I want to discuss with you is when you have a world that, in my opinion, it's a little bit of chaos, right? We've got war for the first time in Europe. We're having, issues with Saudi Arabia, China. There's a lot going on geopolitically. And I'm trying to figure out where we are, all of us are, within a historical context, right? Are we in the 1910s, 1911, right before World War I? Are we in 1936? Like, when you take a look at the political landscape domestically and also geopolitically, where, in your opinion, do you think where do you think we are?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. We're living through this historical time. It's unbelievable. And that's why many people are exhausted, and they're like, just want to check out, because everything's very intense. Because on one hand, authoritarianism is spreading. Yeah. And you have these guys, like, I had a feeling Putin was going to do something, because they're aging out, a lot of these guys. They are having to use more repression. Putin was becoming very unpopular. So when they're in that stage where they start feeling maybe they've reached their peak, they do reckless things. And in fact, in my final chapter of my book, it's called Gambling for Resurrection. They do like a big gesture. So what we're seeing right now is authoritarianism is spreading, but these regimes are being revealed to be weaker than people thought. So look what's happened to Putin. He starts this war, and then it's huge that the Russian military, which everyone was supposed to be afraid of, is effed up.
Yeah.
You said I could be frank, right?
You can use, you could say fuck. Yeah, you're good.
That's an enormous thing that has happened. And this is why Putin has nowhere to go but become more and more, aggressive. And then look what's happened in China, where it's a very different situation, but you had protests. And so these regimes are being revealed to be really, in a way, weak. And that, unfortunately, is going to drive them to be more aggressive. On the other hand, we don't talk about this enough, but we're living through this global renaissance of protest. And 2019 was a record year for nonviolent protest around the world. And since then, look what we had. Like, even in the pandemic, Black Lives Matter was the largest social movement in American history. It had 20 million people participated in a Black Lives Matter event. And there was multi-generational, multiracial. That's like a really big deal. And now look at Iran. I mean, those people going out day after day in Iran, they've been killing thousands of them, and they're still going out. So it's like everything's coming to a head in a way, because, again, you have more repression, because I think these dictators I think they know secretly it's not sustainable. Like, Putin's kleptocracy isn't sustainable, and he knows it. And then you have this incredible movement, new generations who are protesting. So that's where I think we are. It's every day I look at the news and I'm like, my God, what a time to be alive.
And that's exactly, I echo some of the same things, the same sentiments, right? You have, especially within the movement in Iran, you have young, old, you have, you have just the youth saying, we want freedom. Like, and a lot of people and we've had guests, Iranian dissidents on this podcast before. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people don't realize it used to be a very liberal society, right, in the 60s. And there's still people that are alive that remember what it was like before it was the Islamic Republic, when they were under the kind of the rule of the Shah, or we can even go back to the 50s. And I'm going to butcher the guys. John, I'm actually going to need you to pull him up because I can't think of his name right now. But the guy that tried to nationalize oil. And then, with regard to Xi Jinping, basically becoming a modern day emperor, I don't know how sustainable that is. I think that something is going to happen, right? Whether it's the people, because they are starting to protest. There's also, if you want to get way into the weeds, there's a lot of Chinese people that are filming for lack of a better term, concentration camps that are in these far out provinces and putting it on YouTube. Like, you can't stop that level. You can't repress. You can repress people, but like that, your dirty laundry is going to get out because of technology. And John, I don't know if you might be able to link some of these like videos of people driving to these provinces.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really freaky.
Yeah. Were you talking about Mohammed Mossadegh?
No. Just type in like Iranian nationalized oil coup 1950 or something. I can't. Mohammed Mossadegh, I think that's his name. Mossadegh.
Well, one of the things the reason I wanted to write this book, Strongmen, about 100 years of authoritarianism, is to show what stays the same and what changes. And on the one hand, social media and kind of information warfare makes it easier to disseminate propaganda, much easier, much faster. But it's also created all of these, we can call them citizen journalists, people with smartphone cameras. And it's very difficult to control those people. And in fact, in China, the protests started because, people, this experience of lockdown had created an entire, like, millions and millions of people who felt very frustrated with the government. And when they heard about the apartment fire in this faraway province, perhaps they normally wouldn't care. And that's the same province where the concentration camps are. But they felt really badly, so they started to have these candlelight vigils, like in Shanghai and other places, and they were put on social media. And that's what caused it to spiral. So that's why, of course, so many dictators, temporarily or permanently, ban certain platforms, use them to track people. TikTok's a big problem because it can record your data and your location and stuff. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think that it's hugely helping this kind of mass protest that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. What are some of the the reoccurring themes that emerge within dictators? Like, are there certain levels of dictators? I this is something I really haven't given a ton of thought to, but I'm super interested in.
Well, you see, certain personalities who are ruthless and opportunistic, and they will be anything to anyone. They will say anything to anyone. They are the types of amoral personalities who gain power. And very unfortunately for America, I saw that Trump had the same personality as these other people. Now, the outcome obviously is very different today. We don't have as many one-party states outside, communist countries. But somebody who will stop at nothing to get to power, and who, for example, Trump, he was very different than any president of any other party because his goals were autocrat goals. He wanted to make money off of the presidency. So he spent 1 out of every 3 days visiting Trump-branded properties, not governing in the White House. He was visiting his businesses. And then he wanted to radicalize, people through racism. So he worked really, really hard at his propaganda. So when people say that he was lazy, I'm like, no, he wasn't lazy. He just had different goals. He was tweeting like 120 times a day.
I know.
So he worked really hard at certain things, like fleecing people. These are autocrat things: corruption, propaganda, intimidating the party, getting control of the GOP, which is a huge story. Like, he managed to take this party and make it his personal tool, right? So that kind of personality recurs. The other thing, I'll mention one other thing, is this victimhood complex. All of them have to be the victim. And in fact, in the book, I have this incredible poster from the 1920s, a Nazi party poster. So Hitler, he comes up and he does his putsch, fails, he goes to prison. Fine. He comes out and he's speaking, and he's a very, compelling speaker. But the state authorities in different German states, they saw what a danger he was, so they banned him from public speaking. So the Nazi party issued this poster, which is literally Hitler canceled. He has tape over his mouth in the poster from 1926 to 27. And it says, of all the people in Germany, or all the people in the whole world, only I am, banned from speaking. So all of these guys are the victims. That's part of them being the outsiders too. And that sets them up against the establishment, against elites, against democratic elites. It feeds into their use of conspiracy theories, right? I'm banned and it's the Jews. Who are the enemies out to get me? Today it's the deep state. Today it's the EU, or it's NATO for Putin. Back then it was the League of Nations for the fascists. So every single one of these guys, take Erdogan in Turkey, he's talking about witch hunts all the time, and people out to get him, people insulting him. So when Trump comes up and he's like, it's like checking the boxes with this guy. He comes up and he's like, I'm the most persecuted person in the whole world. I was like, I wrote a piece for my newsletter. I'm like, oh, well, so-and-so and so-and-so said they've been the most persecuted person in the whole world. So these are these things that recur, and people fall for them every time.
Why do you think that is? Because it's something that is fascinating me. I mean, on one hand, I think that certain people are thinking, all right, like, we just need to change. And in the case of Putin, I don't really understand how that is. I mean, maybe you just accept it, but let's use Trump, for example. It's an outsider. Maybe he's going to change things, and let's just see what happens type of deal. Is that generally the sense you get in your studies, or is it something that's a little bit more deeply seated in the human psyche?
It's both. Because for some people, these guys they're charismatic. They really know how to use emotion they're performers. So they use emotion to connect with people. When Trump says, like Trump's saying on January 6th, I love you. And he was telling these people, you're the forgotten. Nobody has cared about you. In 2016, I care about you. And so he's so all-powerful and so supposedly rich, and he's got everything every man would want, beautiful women, riches. So when someone like that reaches out, supposedly caring about the little man, that is very compelling. So that's part of it. And they know how to put on a show. They know how to speak. They know how to use media. All of them have been extremely, like Modi in India, he was making holograms of himself to use at rallies. And go and check out his Instagram. He Instagrams his life in a very skillful manner. So they really know what they're doing with communication, with emotion. They're personality cults. They're the man of the people, but they're the man above all other men. So you admire them. So that's part of it. But there's also the racism, where they consciously appeal to people who want to have an enemy. And that differs in different contexts, right? In India, Modi is the engine of Hindu nationalism against Muslims. So anti-Muslim is a big thing all over the world. In China, those are the people in the concentration camps. And for Trump, it was Muslims too. But, non-whites, immigrants, all the roster of people, as well as the press. So different people respond to different things, but those are also things that recur. Having an enemy, using racism, and seducing people.
Yeah, so you consider Modi to be, and I'm very ignorant of Indian politics. Do you consider him to kind of be a strong man? Do you kind of think of him as a dictator in a sense?
He's when we, like the word dictator, we could use it for somebody like Putin. Nowadays, like you don't shut down the other parties, and you don't shut down entirely the press. So he's an authoritarian for sure, and he's been taking over the media. What you do, for example, he just got an ally of his to buy out one of the last independent media outlets. And so you get one of your cronies. That's what Putin did very early on in the early 2000s. You get your cronies, the oligarchs, and you can call them different things in different countries, to buy out or take over media properties, so that you personally don't. It's not like under Nazism, the state, owned everything. Let's say all the media. Today, it's more subtle. You have your cronies and your allies who own stuff. The same in Orban's Hungary. So Modi's doing that, and the word that we use is autocratic capture, where you're capturing the judiciary, you're capturing the media, but it's done in a way that's a little more subtle than in the 20th century.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay, now you've really piqued my interest here. What kinds of things? Because I'm highly paranoid as it is. So because I look at the American media as very fear-mongering and not very accurate. I don't trust anything they say. But and I also kind of view them as like I feel like they also are puppets for the state, whereas like they don't really hit on there's not really a lot of negative press towards certain governmental policies. Like, and again, also, to be fair, I barely watch the news, so maybe that's going on and I just have no idea. But I mean, I feel like the Pentagon losing track of $2.1 trillion in assets would be like a huge story, but it's really not. And that so in your opinion, where are you seeing certain signs like that within the United States, right? Like, is this something that you think that this isn't happening, or is this something that you think is definitely happening?
Well, no, it's not happening in that way because, right now we have a Democrat who's not trying to it's very difficult. It'd be very difficult in this country because, for example, one of our oligarchs is Murdoch, who owns Fox News, and which is a very, very powerful propaganda outlet. It works very efficiently. It really does. And it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for any president, even a Trump, to try and take him over. He's more powerful than, in a sense, any president, in a way, right? So that kind of thing that's easy in Hungary or even in India is a lot more difficult here. What I see happening in media is the media was very traumatized under Trump. I mean, because here's one of the things he did as a demagogue. So plenty of people already hated immigrants. Plenty of people whites didn't like black people. They didn't like Jews and Muslims, etc. And they maybe, some of them distrusted the press, but he made the press a hate object. At those rallies, he, penned them up and had people jeer at them and say, lock them up. And so the press, and there was a lot of violence and threats against the press that continue. And so he really, and that's another sign I was like, check, because they have to go after the press and make people think they're just partisan hacks, because when the press exposes their corruption, they need people to hate the press and not believe the press. So they all do that. Duterte did it in the Philippines. It's like, literally is like a checklist. So Trump did that. And so the media, now he's been gone for a while, but they're very scarred, even the big outlets. And so look what's happening at CNN, which came under intense scrutiny. Jim Acosta was attacked, by Trump and lost his press pass, had to sue. And so now there's this thing going on where they're preventively moving to the center under Chris Licht, this new boss. And that's something that they're being self-protective, but I don't think that's in their interest. I think it's going to restrict further the kinds of things they cover eventually. So that they're almost like they're preparing for the GOP to come back and attack them again, and they want to be not, in CNN's case, they don't want to be as liberal. So that kind of thing is going on.
Yeah, I think that you definitely one of the self-censorship, right, from in any aspect is a giant problem. Because we definitely, I think the American people, everyone really wants the raw truth, in my opinion, I think we're seeing that less and less as days, as time marches on. But there's a lot of really good independent journalists that are disseminating news. Ford Fisher, he's a friend of the show. He's been on but that's very interesting. And you mentioned something about the courts, right? Like is that like phase 3 is kind of controlling the legal system? Yeah.
You know what's happening. I'm not an expert in the judiciary, but we've seen how the Supreme Court, in particular, that the attitudes and actions of Justice Thomas, where his wife was like an insurrectionist. She was, exchanging text messages, egging on the overthrow of the government, and he didn't recuse himself. And he was actually, they were very interested in her, the DOJ, and he announced that he was exploring trying to make it harder for the media to defend itself against libel cases. So basically, you have these signs, and also the way that they did the Dobbs ruling. They've become an activist court because there's so many ultra-conservative people. But Justice Thomas is really just showing that he's not interested in democratic, with a small d, notions of fairness, objectivity, rule of law. And that's very disturbing. So that's what, we have Biden in power, who's a Democrat. So it's not a question of somebody taking over the judiciary like Orban does. And what that means is you force out judges who are not your friends, and you harass them, we've had this in this country. There's scores of people have been resigning from election workers, all kinds of public positions. And then you appoint people who are going to be, do what you need them to do. Yeah. So like one of the reasons Trump's coup attempt didn't work is over 60 judges in the fall of 2020, including many Trump appointees, would not, they didn't want to fix his, go with his rigged election thing, and they turned back his attempts to change the results. Over 60 judges. Now, would that happen today? I don't know, but that's what the Republicans have been working on, getting rid of these judges who aren't going to do their bidding. And the same with the GOP politicians, people who have been standing up to Trump, like Liz Cheney, they're out now. There's no room for them anymore. And then the new people coming in are, even if they're not for Trump right now, a lot of them are criminals. I mean, they're like, members of Oath Keepers. So they're just people who are very lawless, a lot of the new people coming in. So it's like a shift in the political culture, and it affects the judiciary, it affects the political parties, the civil service, all of that.
Most definitely. This is very interesting. I'm fascinated because I've never looked at it through the same lens that you have, right? When towards that point in time, I'm really good at identifying certain characteristics that I have. So when I looked at Trump towards the end, I saw myself in him. The worst aspects of myself, nonetheless, but I was like, I would probably be doing the exact same thing. Like, I don't want to lose. How do I hold on to power? But when you think about like the way that this whatever the enigma that is Trump kind of turned the country on itself, and you had these devout these loyalists, and you had this insurrection, and not only that, you also had like the getting the judges in place. Like, that is very meticulously planned, and I wonder if it's by design. Is he that smart, or is it kind of a happy coincidence? I will also comment on the Clarence Thomas thing. Not a lot of people know that he's been in bed with Monsanto, and that his wife is kind of crazy, like ultra conservative human beings.
Yeah.
And the way that they're able to kind of manipulate these, not necessarily these laws, or the readings of the laws is fascinating to me. Like, there's certain aspects that I'm inclined to be like, oh, that's interesting. I like that. I like states' rights. Or I like where you're going. But when you kind of look at, if you read into kind of their history and all these groups that they're a part of, it gets a little interesting. So kudos to you for knowing about.
One of the other things about Clarence Thomas as well is, I believe it was for the Roe v. Wade decision. He wrote his own opinion.
Yes.
He had said that, like, to revisit things like Obergefell for marriage equality, and I forget the name of the case, but for the interracial marriage, which is insane considering that he's a black man married to a very white woman. Yeah,
but it, like, in his opinion, it's not so. And again, I'm not saying whether I agree or not, but like, I think what he's saying is maybe his goal in life is to make the government smaller and leave that up to states. But this is, John, we've had this. Is it morally correct to undo all of this? And doesn't that cause more problems? I think that at the end of the day, we can all agree it probably does. And we should just kind of leave things the way they are. But I don't want to we'll get lost in the weeds there. But yeah, so I just didn't know. You're probably the first guest I've had on that has talked about that, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, for your question, which a lot of people ask me, is like, is there a design, there, or is like Trump did he make it up as he was going along? It's a little of both, because one thing that really scared me that I didn't know before I was researching the book is, so Trump is an opportunist, like all these guys, Putin. And so they will say anything to anyone. They will be anything they need to be, and they can reverse their positions. And so in that sense, they're always looking for what they should do to survive. It's all about them. It's all they care about is them. They don't actually often care about their own families. They're just them and money and power and survival. But he surrounded himself, really early on with people who had decades of experience wrecking democracies. And I had not realized that. So Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, they had a lobby firm from the 1980s that worked for a lot of dictators. And in 1985, they were hired by Ferdinand Marcos, like the dictator in Philippines, because he was starting to lose power and he was worried about it. So he decides to have this like snap election. And he was, basically he hired them to basically pull off this fraudulent election in 1985. So here are people who ended up being involved with Stop the Steal. And then, of course, Manafort also worked for Putin before he worked for Trump. So these are people who have been doing these things, including election fraud and stuff, for years, for like 40 years. And then there's Steve Bannon, who admires all, right-wing dictators, and well, actually all dictators, all people of power, and is a very skilled propagandist and strategist who is he was advising Bolsonaro. I mean, these are people who really know what they're doing and understand how power works and what you have to do to capture power. And so, in fact, a week after the inauguration of Trump, when you remember how he gets into office and they immediately do the so-called Muslim ban on travel?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of chaos. I got this like vision where I said, oh my God, I know what they're doing. And this was Bannon. He was the mastermind. And there's this thing I call it shock events in the book, where you come in and you shock the system. And Bannon has written about this. And you create a lot of chaos. You create a lot of anxiety and throw everything, again, into chaos. And that's how you introduce that this is going to be a different kind of government.
You set the tone. You make sure that everyone understands what's up.
So they're called shock events. And in fact, on purpose, they implemented that Muslim ban without telling the TSA or the port authorities because they wanted to have a lot of chaos. And I wrote this op-ed for CNN, and I'm amazed they published it. And the title was Trump and Bannon's Coup in the Making. And it was about how they were going to start capturing the state. And this was a week after the inauguration. And I laid it all out. And when I go back and look at it, I'm like, oh my God, it was like all happening, And I don't know how I saw it. I think just from studying fascists for so long, because I was writing my book. I hadn't finished my book then. I just got a sixth sense. And so Bannon he's a big fan of Mussolini, probably likes Hitler, and he has studied all of these game plans. So, Trump knows who to surround himself with. And those are the people who have the wisdom. And they helped him. And think about January 6th. He had Michael Flynn, who is very skilled, psychological warfare and other things. He had Roger Stone again. He had Bannon. He had all kinds of experts in authoritarian this and that helping him.
What do you think are the chances that Trump is able to secure the nomination in, 24? Is it 24? Yeah, 24, I think.
It doesn't look good.
Yeah.
And some months ago, I had this. I've been writing a lot about Ron DeSantis because, unfortunately for us, the minute I saw that guy, and I knew nothing about Florida politics, but just as Trump stood out to me, and I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. Ron DeSantis, I got a very bad feeling. So I started writing about him. And in fact, several people in his entourage have blocked me months ago on Twitter. But I've probably written about 6 pieces, and I'm going to keep writing about this man. because he unfortunately has the strongman tendencies. And we're living through this phenomenon where Trump is too much of a loose cannon. He's got too much baggage, and no one has as much baggage as Trump. No one could possibly have the amount of baggage of Trump, except Berlusconi in Italy. So there's sex assaults, there's money laundering, there's, God knows what with Putin. It's endless. It's dozens and dozens of crimes, right, over decades. So nobody could be that criminal in so many ways. So what happens is that other people who could be equally extremist and racist, but they don't have all that baggage, they look okay in comparison. So they enter Ron DeSantis, who has done already a lot of extremely authoritarian things in his state. He's clearly like using Florida as a little, laboratory, like those sham arrests of people. I mean, it's just, I could go on for an hour about this, but the big picture, which is very scary, is that people think, oh, we're going to go for Ron DeSantis because he's normal. Well, he's not normal. He's extremist, he's racist, but he's going to seem more normal than Trump because that's not hard to seem more normal than Trump. So to answer your question, he's positioned in a good place to get that nomination, and people are turning their backs on Trump, who's just too problematic, right?
Yes.
And let me just say one more thing.
Oh, please.
Unfortunately for us, though, when somebody with Trump's personality feels humiliated or rejected, their response is to become way more disruptive and destructive. And that's why he's like, I'm going to have Nazis to dinner. I'm going to have like the most extreme people. I'm going to like love them and hang around with them. So it's not clear what he's going to do, but it's not going to be good for America if he feels that everybody's forsaking him.
That'll be interesting to watch. Yeah, it's exhausting because
exhausting is right.
We don't have any options because I hate all politicians, and I don't know. I don't know what to do. There's no. I don't know. I'm politically homeless, and I feel like a lot of people feel that way. We just don't have a lot of options, or
Rick and I have had many conversations, both on the show and off the show, about Ron DeSantis, because I have been kind of trying to sound the alarm on Ron DeSantis because I had never heard of him until the pandemic. And just like you said, Ruth, like I got immediately bad vibes the minute I saw him. And have been trying to follow him closely because I've been trying to tell all of my, all the people I know. They're just like, oh, well, at least DeSantis isn't crazy like Trump. And I'm like, no, you should be you should be more scared of him than Trump, I think.
So what the GOP wants is a more disciplined extremist, and Ron DeSantis isn't. So Ron DeSantis isn't going to say, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone. He's not that dumb to say that. Although that was like a big reason people love Trump. But now you see, when you've had a Trump, the culture has changed. Look at the amount of extremists who are now actually GOP lawmakers. Look at the hate crimes toward every category of person who is not white and Christian have skyrocketed. And so Trump has done he's already done his thing, and now the culture can be ready for a DeSantis, but that's going to be, maybe he's going to do things in a quieter manner, but believe me, the end result is not going to be good.
But so to me, right, it feels like, because I feel, and I don't, how do I say this? I don't want to get into teams because I think that's politically why, and I just want to ask, you don't think that anyone that's a member of the GOP is like a fascist or anything like that? You don't think that all Republicans are like extremists, do you?
I think that there's the party and there's voters. Mm-hmm. The party has become a kind of authoritarian party. Unfortunately, that's how it is. And the people who don't fit in with that anymore are being cast out or are leaving voluntarily or run out. Like Liz Cheney, they're going. And so the party, the elites, the official party is pretty, I don't use the F word very often, but it's pretty fascistic at this point. But Republican voters, tens of millions of them, no, they're not all extremists. People vote for, we only have, one of our big problems in this country, we only have these two friggin' parties.
Yeah.
Other countries, they have lots of parties. And if you don't like where one party's going, you have like 2 or 3 other options.
Yes.
So that's why I never brand all Republicans. They're people who's like, their family's been voting Republican for generations, and it's really hard for them to vote Democrat. It doesn't mean that they're fascists. Although, look, I mean, I'm a bit of a hardliner because of the things I study. If you're voting for a racist party that is okay with all kinds of, hate things, then that's, for me, that's a bit of a problem.
So I don't know. And I don't know, again, this isn't an area of expertise for me. So, there's a side of me that wants to push back, right? Because there's a lot of policies that, the Republicans have that I'm more of a right-leaning person just because I like smaller government and a whole myriad of things. So, but it's tough, right? In that aspect. I think that all of any politician is super corrupt. We've got a lot of problems here, but it's hard for me to accept, right, that the party that you think is kind of fascistic. I see your point, but then, if I talk to someone that is maybe a little bit more conservative leaning, they would feel that the other party is more communistic, right? Like what I'm trying to do is discern truth. But the whole thing, there is no communism in America. There's no, this whole left thing is every right-wing party and government has invented this like communist threats. Yes.
And some places there are lively left wings. America is not one of them. I myself get hate mail where they say, you're a commie. I'm not a communist. I've never been, I hate communism. Yeah. I mean, I hate all authoritarianism. I hate fascism and I hate communism. But they need, what's happened with, this is called polarization. You can't have a liberal center anymore. Everybody has to be commies. And here, a prediction for everybody, you're going to have commies 24/7 throughout 2023 on Fox News. It's all going to be about commies. And in fact, I'm now been put on this Professor watch list, which is run by Turning Point USA, as a radical Marxist. I am not, believe me, I'm not a radical Marxist. Or Antifa. I am a proud anti-fascist, but I'm not an Antifa.
You're not a member of any organization. You study fascism.
No.
You do not like it. I'm with you.
So the commie thing is a complete invention. And unfortunately, the GOP is hammering this home. And you have to have, in order to have a authoritarian government, you have to have a commie scare. It's always been that way. Every case study I've done over 100 years, you have a commie scare, and then you come in. In fact, DeSantis, ding, checklist. He just started this new holiday, the holiday for victims of communism. And I was like, well, what about, this is what got me blocked by somebody. I was like, well, okay, that's good. I hate authoritarianism, but where's the holiday for victims of fascism? You got these neo-Nazis saluting on Florida boulevards and you're not doing anything about it. Where's the holiday for victims of fascism? And they didn't like that. So
this is number one. This is a great conversation because my main mission, right, is dialogue. Right. I want us to have dialogue and I can, the thing that scares me the most is how fractured we are and how we're having a tough time discerning truth, because we don't trust any of our institutions anymore, and it's a huge problem. And I'm not sure how we fix that. I'm not sure how we can all. I mean, we all have far more in common than we do, and that was one of the things that I have issues with people that may have been like super big Trump fans. Like, he's just like us. Like, he's a billionaire, dude. Like, he is nothing like you. Or, the fact that, there are certain people that, believe that, more government is and this is a personal, is more government is good if everything they touch turns to crap. Like, we got to find some way that we can come to, like, some way to talk to each other again, and some way to become less radical. And I don't necessarily see a way out of where we are. And I don't know if you do as well.
No, the bridge building stuff, it's really, really important. But that's why, unfortunately, that's why I got testy when you said commies, because the Fox News and associated media universe and the GOP itself is trying very hard to get people into this survivalist mentality, to think that they can't talk to the other side because they're just commies, they're pedophiles. And that's so dangerous, because you're right. We need bridge building. We have a lot in common, and there are forces pushing us apart. And I'm singling out Fox News and Tucker Carlson because he is a fascist demagogue. I will use the F word for him. He has mentioned great replacement theory, which is the fear that, whites are being extinguished by non-whites 400 times on his show. So that's like, boom, 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 indoctrinate people, make them scared of non-whites, make them scared of immigrants. So the latest thing will be commies, just watch. And so I will receive more hate mail. People will try and get me fired and that's just my own micro universe. But that's just so that people will think they can't talk to me and I don't have anything to say to them. And instead, bridge building and speaking, agreeing to disagree, but being civil, that's democracy. And then be very suspicious of people who want to demonize other people, so that cuts off conversation.
I could not agree with you more. And I do get a sense, right? Like, I think that another major factor that we have is there's a giant divide between urban America, people that live in cities, and then like rural America. And I do feel like people that are, that are more rural, right? They feel like they don't have representation. And sometimes, in the state that I live in, there will be laws passed that aren't necessarily good for people that live in a rural place. And so it's easy for them to be, not necessarily be radicalized, I don't like that word, but to be more angry and not feel represented. And I don't know how we solve that. I feel like they do believe that their way of life is kind of under attack. And if you look at it from their perspective, it does seem that it is, right?
But that's why Trump was such a genius in coming to exactly those people and saying, you've been forgotten. No one has cared about you. And he consciously addressed himself to rural people. Mm-hmm. And that's why also the whole thing about the cities are burned out hellholes. And that's starting again. That's been starting again with Fox News. Mm-hmm. And you should see the number of hate mails I get, people judging me. They're like, oh, you teach at NYU, instead of NYU. Ooh. But the city, I'm in the city, so I must be this, I'm the commie, I'm the Jewish commie. And so, but the rural-urban divide is a big deal.
It is.
It's actually a big deal in many places where authoritarianism comes in.
Sorry.
So I was just going to say, that's a big failing of the Democratic Party, that it has not known most people. But John Fetterman, who won in Pennsylvania, he's an exception. He knows how to talk to people, and he knows he gets it. But Democrats have been a little too elitist, and they have not taken people's suffering seriously in rural places. And that's not hurt. That has hurt them.
Most definitely. And another thing, like from my point of view, I definitely have leanings that are definitely towards the right, but I love that you pointed out a flaw, right? I did, I'm sympathetic. I'm more of a rural person, right? I have a rural background. But I do think it's correct to, and I don't trust any mainstream media, but it is funny how even I was a bit susceptible, right? I used communist, like I used a kind of a buzzword. In speaking with Ford Fisher, I said extremist at one point, and he said, "No, I like to use the word activist because extremist has a negative connotation. I want to understand these people." So thanks for pointing that out. And I also appreciate when you're very careful to throw around the F word. I think that's also a big problem, is throwing a Nazi, any of that around too much. It takes power away from it, and it's hard for me, who's trying to discern truth. It's really hard for me to listen. It's like you cry wolf too many times, and that's a very serious connotation. And that, to me, if you're either one of those things, I don't like you, and I don't know if I can change your mind. I think it might be too late for me to try and change your mind. And so I think the work that you're doing is very important, and it's very valuable. And I love that you want to build bridges. I think that we've got to do that, because I have friends. We engage in political discussions from time to time, and some of them do think that, maybe in our lifetimes we might see some sort of conflict or something arise because we can't figure out how to talk to each other. And I'm wondering, do you get that same sense, or do you think that, that's something that we're just being paranoid about?
No, I mean, definitely there's an uptick in political violence. Look at what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband. They were looking for her. It was that was like an extension of January 6th. And we had January 6th. I mean, people are like, they still haven't even digested January 6th. It's unbelievable. I had to look at pictures of it today, and every time I feel sick to my stomach. I just can't. And I study this stuff, and I just can't even with January 6th. And so this is why I'm so worried about this demonization by Republicans of Democrats, saying they're pedophiles, they're commies, they're this, because that leads people to be seen as people you have to use violence against. That's the problem. And when you stop talking, you start shooting. And then the big wild card in our country, which other countries don't have, is 400 million guns in private hands. And so that's and this is not a discussion about whether you think somebody should have, my dad kept a handgun at home. He's ex-military. And so, but this is about assault weapons availability when you're in a situation of extreme polarization. Then you're going to get more buffaloes. Somebody, influenced by radical right extremist racism and goes and shoots up African-American supermarket. You're going to get more and more of those things, because that's the unpredictable part versus the history of such situations.
Yes. Yeah. I think that potentially you and I might have polar opposite views on that, and that's okay. But
yeah, that's okay.
It is okay.
So, but let's take out the gun part. And when in the history of political violence, what demagogues have done before to get people in a situation to do harm to their neighbors or to groups of people who have the wrong religion or skin color or whatever, is you have to do this demonization. So we can leave out the guns because it could be stabbings, it could whatever the heck they're doing. All right, but you've got to have this mass demonization of an enemy, And in military dictatorships I write about in my book, it was commies. Anybody left, socialists or just as long, whatever left thing you were commie. And you had to be exterminated or locked up or tortured. Obviously for fascists, it was Jews as well as commies. So that I watch very carefully signs by people like Tucker Carlson of trying to get Americans in a mood to just see people in one way and think that the only way to deal with those people is violence. That's what I'm tracking.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing to track. When you
scary.
It is scary. I do have a question for you, right? Like at the end of the day, do you trust the institution of our government? Like I kind of want to get a sense of how you feel about that.
I do. I think it's very important to now. I mean, it depends what government is there. If you have a demagogue in power, when Trump was in power, I did not trust him. Obviously, I know that, for example, there were government agencies that had a lot of honest people in them, and then there were a lot of Trump appointees that were terribly corrupt or violent or whatever. But I think what we can say historically is when people lose faith and trust in all the institutions, including media, that is when it becomes difficult to sustain democracy. Because if you have no faith that the government is on your side at all in any way, whether it's local government or your town or the federal government, you're more likely to be seduced by an anti-government person, because Trump, of course, he became the president, but at the beginning, he's the outlaw. He's the rogue. In fact, he called his campaign a movement at the beginning. And so you're also more likely to have such a hatred that you are willing to assault the Capitol and kill Capitol Police. Because you want to overthrow the government because you hate it so much. And there's a lot of anti-government extremists in our country too. There's that. Yeah. So that's, if you don't have any trust, who do you trust? You trust your tribe. And sometimes your tribe are people who they only think the same things you do. And that's why also QAnon is catching on, it's huge now, and other conspiracy theories. So that's the problem with that.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I do want to talk about what happened in Germany. God, was it a week ago? It's about a week ago, right?
Yeah.
You had there was a coup that was attempted, and I would like for you to kind of go into that. Is this something that, because it took me by complete surprise, and I was wondering, is that, and if you could explain a little bit for our listeners, A, what was it, and then B, did it take you by surprise?
So it didn't take by surprise the people who study extremism in Germany. I don't follow it that closely. And this was a group that is part of, there are a lot of extremists in Germany. And in fact, there are many more now because during the pandemic, QAnon arrived in Germany. And it's the country outside of the US that has the biggest QAnon group, let's say. But these were people who belonged to a homegrown sovereign citizen movement. We have sovereign citizen movements here too. And they want to they want to do a coup and liberate Germany from democracy and install a Fourth Reich, because they're also kind of neo-Nazis. So Hitler was the Third Reich, they're gonna have the Fourth Reich. Now, and there were 25 people were arrested, so it didn't go anywhere. But what was interesting the studies show that these were not, we tend to want to label these people as fringe or extremists, but this group included a sitting judge who was a former member of parliament, this aristocratic guy, members of the police, members of the military. So these are people who are so a lot of German extremist specialists or intelligence officers, they said these are mainstream people. These are not like skinheads, right? Because and the same is true with January 6th. That's what I wrote today for my newsletter. We want to just label those people as extremists, but all the studies done on who actually was there bashing, breaking the glass and trying to kidnap and harm the lawmakers, Republican and Democrat. They were middle class. One person's called the middle class and middle age. They were computer programmers. They were architects. They were all kinds of people from the military, people from the National Guard. And so again, these are mainstream people.
Yeah.
So the new extremism is mainstream.
Yeah, I thought that they were trying, and John, pull this up just for the sake of it. I thought they were trying to install a second Reich. It was the government they were trying to institute was one based off of, I think, 1888. We pull that up just to make sure.
It's 1871.
Yeah, they've been claiming that there was no Third Reich. They call it the
Fourth Reich.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a recall back to the Second Reich when Germany had a monarchy.
Yes.
But the ideology is this Fourth Reich, because they can't really, the Second Reich already was. The Third Reich was Hitler. So what they want is no more democracy. That's the point.
They're called the Reichsbürgers.
Yes, the Reichsbürgers. And no more democracy, restore the monarchy. Not all of them believe that, but this group did. And have an authoritarian state that way.
Wow. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I definitely, as the elections, as we enter even closer into the election cycle, I'm gonna have to get you back on there. I really,
absolutely,
I enjoy talking to you. It is refreshing to get someone that has very different opinions and beliefs than I do, but we can still talk. And I learned a lot too. Me too. I like that. Yeah, we'll definitely talk again. Yeah, absolutely. So, you have a book out. But where can people find you? Please let the people know.
So, you can find, I have a website that's www.ruthbenghiat.com. And there, you can sign up for my newsletter called Lucid, Lucid. It's a Substack newsletter. And you can read my book called Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. So it goes up through Trump. And I'm on Twitter, I'm still on Twitter, at Ruth Ben-Ghiat. So those are the main places to find me.
Well, Ruth, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again. And folks, let's do more talking, more dialogue, and more understanding, and put yourself in the other person's shoes, even if you don't agree with them, because the mind is like a parachute. It only works if it's open. Peace and love, friends. See you next week.